A millionaire gave the worst horse from his stable to a poor child, just to humiliate her in public. The animal was old, injured and abandoned, and everyone expected a spectacle of shame. But the girl surprised them all by transforming the failure they gave her into hope. On the day of the race, she silenced the elite and made the millionaire regret his actions in front of the entire farm. Amber Parker was only 16 years old, but she already carried in her eyes the shine of determination that not even life's adversities had managed to extinguish. The daughter of Samuel, who was responsible for the stables at Dawn Ridge Farm, the largest and most prestigious rural property in New Hope. She grew up among horses, learning to love these animals as much as her father did. Dawn Ridge Farm had belonged to the Montgomery family for generations. Currently, Patriarch Richard Montgomery commanded the empire with an iron fist, assisted by his son Grant, an arrogant young man who had inherited from his father not only the fortune, but also the contempt for the employees who kept the property running. On that autumn morning, Amber observed through the fence the training of horses for the traditional annual race of New Hope, an event that brought together the region's elite and always put Dawn Ridge Farm in the spotlight. The young girl's heart raced every time she saw the animals galloping, free and majestic across the training field. "One day I'll be there too," she whispered to herself as her fingers gripped the weathered wood of the fence. "Talking to yourself, Amber?" The soft voice of Claire, her best friend and the daughter of the farm's cook, interrupted her thoughts. "I'm just daydreaming," Amber replied, without taking her eyes off the horses. "Claire, I'm going to participate in the race this year. I've already decided." Claire's eyes widened, surprised by the determination in her friend's voice. "You're joking, right? Only the children of landowners and special guests can participate. It's tradition." "Traditions can change," Amber responded, turning to face her friend. "My mother always said that rules are like fences. They exist to be respected, but also to show exactly where we need to jump when the time comes." The mention of her mother brought a momentary silence between the two. 3 years had passed since Celeste had departed this world, leaving a void that Samuel tried to fill with double the work, and Amber with increasingly intense dreams. "I'm going to speak with Mr. Richard today," Amber decided, adjusting the braid that held back her black hair. "Are you crazy?" Claire grabbed her friend's arm. "Your father will be furious. He could lose his job, Amber." "I'm not going to ask my father's permission," Amber replied, gently freeing herself from Claire's grip. "Some things we need to do on our own." As she walked toward the main house, Amber felt her heart racing, but she maintained the upright posture her mother had taught her. "Head held high like a queen, even when your knees are trembling like a leaf in the wind," Celeste used to say. The imposing house of the Montgomery family contrasted brutally with the modest dwellings of the employees. Built with fine woods and decorated with pieces brought from Europe, the mansion seemed to observe the entire property from the top of its hill, like a concrete symbol of the inequality that separated masters and employees. Amber had never entered through the front door. As an employee's daughter, she always used the back entrance when she needed to deliver a message. But on that day, something inside her pushed her beyond the established boundaries. She climbed the steps of the porch and, taking a deep breath, knocked on the door. Seconds later, the housekeeper, Mrs. Irene, answered, frowning when she saw who it was. "What are you doing here, girl? You know employees must use the service entrance." "I need to speak with Mr. Richard. It's important." The housekeeper let out a dry laugh. "And since when does the boss receive a horse handler's daughter? Go back to the stables where you belong." Amber felt her face burn, but she remained firm. "Please, Mrs. Irene, it's about the annual race." Before the housekeeper could respond, a male voice sounded from inside the house. "Who's there, Irene?" It was Richard Montgomery, who was approaching the entrance hall accompanied by his son Grant and his wife Helen. Amber felt her stomach tighten, but it was too late to retreat. "It's Samuel's daughter, sir. She was just leaving." "No, I wasn't," Amber corrected, with a courage that even she didn't know where it came from. "I need to speak with you, Mr. Richard." The man with his graying hair and imposing posture looked at the young girl with curiosity. Helen, always elegant in her expensive dresses, wrinkled her nose as if she smelled something unpleasant. "And what does a servant girl have to say to me?" asked Richard with a slight tone of amusement. "I'm not a servant, sir. I'm the daughter of the man responsible for your stables," Amber corrected, feeling her throat go dry. "I've come to ask permission to participate in the annual race." The silence that followed was broken by Grant's shrill laughter. The young man's laugh seemed like a whip cutting through the air, but Amber remained motionless, her eyes fixed on Richard. A girl? An employee's daughter? In the Montgomery race? Helen finally spoke with evident contempt in her voice. Richard, however, wasn't laughing. He observed Amber with an analytical expression, as if evaluating merchandise. "Do you know how to ride?" he asked, surprising everyone. "I grew up in the stables, sir. My father taught me since I was little." "Richard, you can't be considering," Helen began, but was interrupted by a gesture from her husband. "The annual race has always been an event to show the superiority of our horses and our young people," explained Richard with a calculating smile. "Perhaps it would be interesting to have a contrast this year, something to entertain our guests." Grant seemed to catch his father's intention and smiled maliciously. "It would be quite a spectacle, Dad. The stable girl at the starting line, trying to compete with real riders." Amber felt the blood freeze in her veins. She hadn't expected it to be so easy, and now she understood why. They weren't granting an opportunity. They were preparing a public humiliation. "So I can participate?" she asked, keeping her voice firm despite her fear. Richard exchanged a knowing look with his son before answering. "Of course, Amber. And to show my generosity, I'll even provide a horse for you." "I'm sure I know which one would be perfect," added Grant, with a cruel gleam in his eyes. That same afternoon, Samuel received the news like a bucket of cold water. His face, marked by the sun and hard work, paled when the foreman informed him that his daughter had obtained authorization to participate in the race. "Have you lost your mind, Amber?" he asked when they were finally alone in the small house where they lived. "The Montgomerys don't do favors. If they allowed this, it's because they have something in mind." "I know, Dad," Amber replied, sitting next to him at the old wooden table. "But it's my chance to prove that we are more than they think, that we can dream too." Samuel sighed, running his calloused hand through his graying hair. "Your mother said you had her spirit, stubborn as a mule when you set your mind on something." A shy smile appeared on Amber's lips. "You always say she was the bravest person you ever knew." "And she was," he confirmed with teary eyes. "But she was also prudent. She knew how to choose her battles." Before they could continue the conversation, they heard knocks at the door. It was Grant Montgomery, accompanied by two employees who were leading a horse that Amber immediately recognized. Thunder, a former champion who was now nothing more than a shadow of what he had been. Skinny, with a dull coat and an obvious limp in his front leg, the animal seemed as dejected as it was confused to be there. "Your steed for the race, miss," announced Grant with false courtesy. "I think you two are a perfect match." Amber felt her heart tighten upon seeing the state of the animal. Thunder had been one of the most magnificent specimens on the farm years ago, before being relegated to a forgotten corner of the stables after an injury. "What have you done to him?" she murmured, slowly approaching the horse. "Nothing that time and uselessness don't naturally do," replied Grant with cruelty. "Consider it a generous gift. After all, for an absurd pretension, a horse to match." When Grant and his men left, leaving the animal tied up near the house, Samuel looked at his daughter with concern. "This is what they want, Amber. To make a joke out of you." Amber approached Thunder, gently touching his muzzle. The horse, initially skittish, seemed to relax under her gentle touch. In the tired eyes of the animal, she saw something that touched her deeply. Wounded dignity, but not destroyed. "Then let's surprise them, Dad," she replied, without taking her eyes off the horse. "Me, you, and Thunder. Let's show them what true nobility means." In the following week, the news that the stable hand's daughter would participate in the annual race spread through Dornridge Farm like wildfire. For some, it was cause for mockery. For others, mainly the humbler workers, a small spark of hope disguised in respectful silences and admiring glances when Amber passed by. Dawn was still just a promise on the horizon when Amber arrived at the small improvised enclosure where they now kept Thunder. Her father had managed to separate him from the other animals, fearing that the horse's weakened state would make him an easy target for aggression. With a kerosene lantern lighting the way, the young girl approached the animal that slept standing up, as horses do. "Good morning, champion," she whispered, gently touching the animal's neck. Thunder slowly opened his eyes, as if the weight of years made even this simple gesture an effort. Upon recognizing Amber, his ears moved slightly forward, a subtle sign of recognition that warmed the girl's heart. "I brought something for you," she continued, taking some apples from a cloth bag that she had gotten from the farm's kitchen, thanks to Claire's mother. The horse sniffed the fruits with renewed interest, accepting the gift with a surprising delicacy for such a large animal. Amber observed carefully as he ate, noticing how the injury in his front leg made him distribute his body weight unevenly. "We're going to take care of that," she promised, caressing the dull coat. "My mother knew how to treat injured horses. She taught me a few things." Amber remembered how Celeste, before falling ill, used to help her husband in the stables. She had a special way with animals, especially the sick or frightened ones. "Horses are like mirrors of the soul," she used to say. "They reflect exactly what they feel from us." Lost in memories, Amber almost didn't notice her father's approach. Samuel observed his daughter with the horse for a few moments before making his presence known. "You look so much like her when you're like this," he commented, his voice thick with contained emotion. Amber smiled without taking her eyes off Thunder. "I found her notebook last night, Dad. The one with notes on natural remedies and massages for horses." Samuel approached, inspecting the animal with experienced eyes. This horse was once the pride of Dawn Ridge Farm. He won every race until he suffered that injury in the Grand Prix 5 years ago. Afterward, old Richard simply abandoned him, as if discarding a broken tool. "How did he get hurt?" asked Amber, interested in every detail that could help her. "It was during the last curve. Thunder was in the lead as usual, when something frightened him. Some say it was fireworks going off in the crowd, others think it was intentional." Samuel paused, hesitant. The rider was Grant. He was thrown but wasn't seriously injured. Thunder, on the other hand, was never the same again. Amber felt a shiver run down her spine. The story seemed to contain more than her father was willing to reveal, but she decided not to press. For now, her priority was the animal's well-being. "I'll be late for breakfast today, Dad. I want to start the treatments Mom noted in her notebook." Samuel hesitated, concerned. "Daughter, don't get your hopes up too much. The race is in 2 months, and this horse can barely trot without limping." 2 months is enough time for many transformations," replied Amber, with a conviction that surprised even herself. "Thunder just needs someone to believe in him again." When her father walked away to start his daily tasks, Amber opened her mother's worn notebook. The yellowed pages contained detailed drawings of medicinal plants, instructions for preparing compresses, and specific massage techniques for different types of injuries. Celeste's careful handwriting seemed to guide her through time, as if her mother were there, teaching her personally. "Let's start with this," murmured Amber, setting aside a page with instructions for an herbal compress to reduce inflammation. In the weeks that followed, Amber established a rigorous routine. She woke before sunrise to treat Thunder, applying warm compresses to the injured leg and massaging his atrophied muscles. During the day, between her usual tasks, she escaped to bring food specially selected to strengthen the animal. At night, she returned to read aloud to the horse, convinced that the connection between them strengthened with each shared word. Gradually, small changes began to manifest. Thunder's coat regained some of its lost shine. His gaze, previously apathetic, now followed Amber's movements with renewed interest. And most importantly, his limp, though still present, seemed less pronounced. "I'm telling you, Claire, he's responding to the treatment," exclaimed Amber, as the two friends peeled potatoes in the big house's kitchen. Claire smiled, but her eyes revealed concern. "You're sleeping less than 5 hours a night, Amber. You're killing yourself for an impossible dream." "It's not impossible," Amber shot back with fervor. "Don't you see how he looks at me now? He wants to run again, I can feel it." Claire held her friend's hand, interrupting her work. "Even if Thunder recovers completely, which is unlikely, do you think the Montgomerys will simply accept it when they realize their humiliation plan is at risk?" "They're dangerous, Amber." Claire's concern was not unfounded. In recent days, Amber had noticed curious glances from Grant Montgomery when she left Thunder's enclosure. Once, she even found him watching from a distance as she applied a compress to the animal's leg. "I see you're dedicated to our agreement," he commented, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you understand that this changes nothing. You and that nag will be the entertainment of the race, not the winners." Amber had swallowed her anger, responding only with a polite nod, but Grant's words lit an even greater determination within her. That night, after the encounter, she returned to the enclosure with a plan. "We're going to try something new today, Thunder," she announced, stroking the animal's neck. "Do you think you can carry me for a few minutes?" The horse whinnied softly as if he understood. Carefully, Amber adjusted an old saddle she had recovered from the farm's storage. It was simple, nothing compared to the luxurious equipment used by the Montgomery family's riders, but it would serve the purpose. With slow and deliberate movements, she mounted Thunder, feeling the animal adjust to her weight. "Let's go slowly," she murmured, leaning to caress his mane. "Just a few steps today." To her surprise, Thunder began to walk with a determination he hadn't shown in weeks. Although he still favored the injured leg, his step had a rhythm, a cadence that spoke of muscle memories of past glories. Silent tears ran down Amber's face as they slowly circled the small space. It wasn't just the emotion of riding the animal for the first time. It was the inexplicable feeling that she was sharing something profound with him, a connection that transcended words. What Amber didn't know was that they were being watched. From the top of a nearby hill, a solitary figure followed every movement. John, a former horse handler who had been dismissed from the farm years ago, immediately recognized the animal. "It can't be," he murmured to himself, adjusting his worn glasses to be sure. "Thunder is still alive." The next morning, when Amber arrived for the usual treatment, she found an old man waiting near the enclosure. She vaguely recognized him from encounters in the village, but they had never spoken. "Good morning, miss," he greeted, with an old-fashioned politeness. "I hope I'm not being intrusive, but I need to talk about Thunder." Amber felt a chill in her stomach. "You know this horse?" "Better than anyone on this farm," replied John with a sad smile. "I was the one who brought him into the world, cared for him since he was a foal, and I was with him on the day of the accident." The revelation left Amber speechless. The old man took advantage of the silence to continue. "Last night I saw you riding him. It was like going back in time. The way you moved together in harmony. Thunder never allowed that with anyone after the accident, not even with me." "What really happened in that race, Mr. John?" asked Amber, feeling that she could finally discover the truth. The old man looked around, making sure they were alone, before answering in a low voice. "Grant Montgomery was never a good rider. Impatient, brutal with animals. Thunder only tolerated him because I was always nearby." He paused, as if gathering courage to continue. "In that race, Grant used sharp spurs, forbidden by the regulations. When Thunder reacted to the pain, Grant lost control. The horse injured himself, trying to protect himself from his own rider's cruelty." Amber felt her blood boil with the revelation. "And that's why you were fired? For knowing the truth?" John nodded slowly. "Richard Montgomery preferred to sacrifice an employee and a champion horse rather than admit his son was at fault. After that, Thunder never received proper treatment for his injury. I'm trying to treat him with the techniques my mother left in her notes," explained Amber, showing the worn notebook. The old man took the notebook with trembling hands, leafing through the pages with reverence. "Celeste," he murmured, with recognition in his voice. "She had a special gift. She learned many of these techniques from me, you know? We were friends before." The old man's voice failed, leaving the sentence incomplete. Amber felt a lump in her throat, realizing there was much more to this story than she had imagined. Her mother's memory, Thunder's past, the cruelty of the Montgomerys. Everything was intertwined in a complex web that she was only beginning to understand. "Could you help me?" she asked, with renewed hope. "Teach me what you know about Thunder's injury, how to treat it properly." John looked at the horse, who was watching the conversation with evident interest. Something in the animal's gaze seemed to decide the question. "Every day at dusk," he agreed with determination in his tired eyes. "But we need to be discreet. If the Montgomerys find out—" "They won't find out," Amber assured him, with a conviction that surprised even herself. "And when race day comes, they'll have the biggest surprise of their lives." What Amber didn't notice was Grant Montgomery's silhouette, silently moving away after overhearing part of the conversation. His narrowed eyes and tense jaw revealed that the battle for Thunder's dignity and Amber's dream had just become much more dangerous. The calendar marked exactly 1 month until the big race, when the first signs of sabotage began. Amber arrived at the enclosure on a cold winter morning to find the gate open and Thunder missing. Her heart pounding in her chest, she ran through the property calling for the animal, until she found him near the stream that cut through the farm, shaking from cold after an entire night exposed to the dew. "Who did this to you?" she murmured, embracing the horse's neck as she led him back. The answer, though not verbalized, hung clear in the air. Thunder's recovery wasn't going unnoticed, and someone was bothered by the progress. "We need a safer place," commented John that same afternoon after examining the animal. The old handler had become a constant presence in recent weeks, bringing knowledge that complemented Celeste's notes. "There's no safe place on this farm," replied Samuel, who had finally agreed to actively participate in his daughter's project. Initially resistant out of fear of reprisals, the stable hand now shared Amber's dream, driven by both love for his daughter and the memory of his wife. "I know a place," suggested Claire, who helped by preparing herbal mixtures for the compresses. "Old Michael's abandoned cabin on the northern boundary of the property. Nobody has gone there since he left for the city." The suggestion was immediately accepted. That same night, taking advantage of the darkness and the absence of the Montgomerys, who had traveled to the capital, Thunder was transferred to the isolated cabin. The location, although simple, offered protection against the elements and, more importantly, was away from curious eyes. The news of the secret transfer spread discreetly among the farm's employees. To Amber's surprise, instead of betrayal, what followed was a silent wave of solidarity. Anthony, the carpenter, showed up one day with wood to reinforce the cabin walls. Mrs. Martha, the cook, set aside the best vegetables for Thunder's food. Even young Peter, the blacksmith's apprentice, made a special horseshoe that better distributed weight on the injured leg. "Why are they helping us?" Amber asked Claire, moved by the unexpected support. "Because you're doing what many here would like to do but never had the courage," replied her friend with simplicity. "Challenging the Montgomerys, proving that we are more than they think. Each piece of wood, each extra carrot, each piece of advice from Mr. John, they're small acts of rebellion." Thunder's progress was undeniable. Under the combined care of Amber, John, and now a small community of secret supporters, the horse emerged from the shadows of neglect. His coat regained the golden shine that had made him famous. His muscles returned to definition under previously flaccid skin, and his gaze displayed a vivacity that moved everyone who visited him. The injury, though still present, responded well to continuous treatment. John had taught Amber to apply medicinal clay to the affected area, combined with specific massages that relieved pain and strengthened damaged tendons. In recent weeks, they had begun light training, progressively longer walks, followed by short trots on flat terrain. "He'll never be the same as before," explained John, after a particularly promising training session. "But horses, like people, can learn to compensate for their limitations when they have a purpose strong enough." "And what is his purpose?" asked Amber, while drying Thunder's sweat with a clean cloth. The old man smiled, with wisdom in his eyes. "At first, maybe it was just to survive. Now, I think it's you, girl. The connection between you, it's something you don't see every day." Amber blushed slightly at the old handler's words. Indeed, something inexplicable had developed between her and Thunder. Just a touch, a whisper, and the animal seemed to understand exactly what she wanted. During training, they moved in perfect synchrony as if sharing thoughts. "My mother said that some bonds transcend common understanding," commented Amber, recalling night conversations with Celeste. "That when two souls recognize each other, no matter what form they inhabit, communication goes beyond words." John nodded, with a gleam of emotion in his eyes. "Your mother was a wise woman, and if she were here, she would be very proud of what you're doing." The following week brought the return of the Montgomery family, and with them, new challenges. Grant, intrigued by Thunder's disappearance, began asking persistent questions. Samuel remained firm, claiming that the animal was isolated for health reasons, a half-truth that didn't completely convince the young master. One afternoon, as Amber was returning from the hidden cabin, she found Grant waiting for her on the path, leaning against a tree with a casual air. "Taking a walk around the property, Amber?" he asked with false cordiality. "Strange, considering that your duties are all near the main house." "I was gathering some herbs for my father," she replied, showing a small basket where, in fact, there were some medicinal plants. The precaution of always taking the basket with her now proved useful. Grant approached, invading her personal space in a way that made her instinctively back away. "You know what's even stranger? How a practically invalid horse simply disappears, and at the same time employees start acting suspiciously. Night meetings, diverted supplies. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir," replied Amber, maintaining a steady gaze despite the fear growing in her chest. "Of course you do," he insisted, gripping her arm with enough force to leave marks. "And let me be very clear. If you think you're going to transform my entertainment into some kind of inspirational spectacle, you're very mistaken. I know people like you who don't accept their place in the world." Amber freed herself from his grip with a sharp movement. "And what would my place be, Mr. Grant?" His smile was pure contempt. "Serving, obeying, accepting the crumbs with gratitude, and especially never ever dreaming of being equal to us." The words hit Amber like whiplashes, but instead of intimidating her, they lit an even stronger flame within her. "The race will show everyone's place," she responded, with a calmness she didn't know she possessed. "That's if there's a race for you," Grant shot back with an implicit threat in his voice. "Accidents happen, especially with problematic horses. A weak leg can break easily. A frightened animal can throw its rider against a tree. Think about that." That night, Amber reported the encounter to her father and John. The concern etched on both their faces only confirmed the gravity of the situation. "He knows something," concluded Samuel, running his hand over his tired face. "And knowing Grant Montgomery, he won't stop until he discovers everything." "We need to redouble our caution," agreed John. "Never go to the cabin by the same path. Avoid patterns that can be observed. Always have someone on watch." Amber listened in silence, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. It wasn't just her dream at stake, but Thunder's safety and that of everyone who was helping her. "Maybe we should give up," she suggested with a heavy heart. "Thunder is better. We could keep him hidden until we find a safe place far from here." John shook his head with surprising firmness for his advanced age. "Giving up is exactly what they expect, what they've always expected from people like us. That we accept our condition, that we bow our heads, that we swallow injustice with resignation. But what if someone gets hurt? What if Thunder—" Amber couldn't even complete the sentence, the fear of the possibility freezing the words in her throat. It was Samuel who answered, with a determination that Amber rarely saw in her usually calm and submissive father. "Your mother used to say that living in fear isn't truly living. If we stop now, the Montgomerys will win even without the race happening." The conversation was interrupted by urgent knocks at the door. It was Claire, breathless and with eyes wide with fear. "I heard Grant talking with some men near the stables," she informed, as soon as the door closed behind her. "They're going to look for Thunder tomorrow. Search every corner of the property if necessary." The silence that followed was as dense as fog. Finally, it was John who broke it, with a suggestion that sounded absurd at first glance. "We need to hide Thunder in the most obvious place, back in the main stables." "That's crazy," exclaimed Samuel. "It's the first place they'll look." "Exactly why they won't expect to find him there," explained the old handler. "We can use the most remote stall, the one that's partially hidden by the hay storage. No one has gone there since the renovation began." The plan was risky, but it made sense. That same night, with the help of Peter and 2 more trusted young employees, Thunder was silently transferred back to the farm. The chosen stall, covered in dust and cobwebs, was quickly cleaned and prepared to receive the animal. "Now we need a horse to put in the cabin," completed John, surprising everyone with his astuteness. "If they search there, they'll find an animal, just not Thunder." Peter offered to take one of the older horses from the stable, used only for small services on the farm. "No one will miss him for a day or 2, the young blacksmith assured them. The plan was executed perfectly. The next morning, when Grant led a group of employees on a search across the property, Amber kept herself busy with her usual tasks, her heart racing every time she heard voices approaching the stables. By dusk, the search had ended without success. Grant, frustrated, ordered them to continue looking in the following days. What he didn't know was that, literally under his nose, Thunder was receiving the usual care, now in an even more elaborate scheme of rotation among the Allied employees. The incident, instead of weakening Amber's determination and that of her supporters, strengthened the bonds between them even more. What had begun as a solitary dream had transformed into a collective cause, a symbol of silent resistance against years of unfair treatment. 2 weeks before the race came the blow that Amber feared most. Richard Montgomery called a meeting with the participants to announce a change in the rules. Only children of associated rural landowners and their guests could compete, a tradition that, according to him, had been temporarily relaxed but now returned for safety reasons. The news hit Amber like a dagger. After all the effort, all the sleepless nights, all the risks taken, she would be prevented from participating by a rule created especially to exclude her. They realized they couldn't humiliate us on the track, so they decided to prevent us from even getting there, she concluded with bitterness, as she reported the news to her small circle of trust. What Amber didn't expect was her father's reaction. Samuel, always calm and conforming, usually the first to accept the boss's impositions, stood up with clenched fists. "This isn't going to stand," he declared, with a firmness that surprised everyone. "Tomorrow I'll speak with Richard Montgomery." "Dad, no, you could lose your job," protested Amber, grabbing her father's arm. Samuel smiled, with a serenity that contrasted with his determination. "Some risks are worth it, daughter. Your mother taught me that." The next morning, wearing his best shirt, still simple and worn by time, Samuel headed to the big house. Amber, unable to contain her anxiety, followed him at a distance, hiding behind a column on the porch to hear the conversation. The stable hand found Richard in his office, reviewing documents with the farm administrator. Without waiting for an invitation, he entered and positioned himself before the imposing desk. "Samuel?" Richard raised his eyes, surprised by the intrusion. "What does this mean?" "I've come to talk about the new race rules, sir," replied Samuel, keeping his voice firm despite the nervousness evident in his trembling hands. "You gave your word that my daughter could participate." Richard dismissed the administrator with a gesture before responding. "The rules have always been these, Samuel. I just made a temporary exception, which is now no longer convenient." "Inconvenient because Thunder is recovering?" questioned Samuel, surprising Richard with his boldness. "Or because you fear that your amusement at my daughter's expense might transform into something else?" Richard's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Be careful with your words, Samuel. 30 years of service don't give you the right to question my decisions." "No, sir. What gives me that right is being a father," Samuel shot back, with a dignity that made Amber swallow back tears. "You've known us forever. You knew my Celeste, watched Amber grow up. You know we're good people, that we've served this family with loyalty. All I ask is that you honor your word." Richard stood up, circling the desk to face Samuel up close. "And if I don't honor it, what do you intend to do? Organize a rebellion among the employees?" The tone was scornful, but there was a note of genuine concern in his voice. "No, Mr. Richard. I'll just remember that there was a time when this farm was known not only for its racehorses, but for how it treated people. Your father, old Montgomery, would never have allowed a child to be humiliated for adults' entertainment." The mention of his father seemed to hit Richard at a sensitive point. His hardened face softened momentarily, as if a distant memory had reached him. "Let her race," continued Samuel, taking advantage of the opening. "If it's to humiliate us, let it be on the track, not by changing the rules out of fear." "Fear?" Richard let out a forced laugh. "What would I be afraid of, Samuel? A girl on a lame horse?" "Of what she represents," replied Samuel with simplicity. "Of the possibility, however small, that she might prove we're all wrong about our places in this world." A dense silence settled in the office. Amber outside was barely breathing, waiting for the explosion of fury that would surely follow. To her surprise, when Richard finally spoke, his voice was controlled, almost thoughtful. "She can participate," he declared, returning to his chair, "but without a regulation saddle, without an official uniform, and starting in last place. Those are my final conditions." The news that Amber could participate in the race spread quickly through Dawn Ridge Farm, awakening diverse reactions. Among the workers there was contained excitement, a silent hope that manifested in knowing looks and small gestures of support. In the big house, on the other hand, Richard's decision generated tension, especially with Grant, who didn't hide his indignation. "Dad, have you gone crazy?" questioned the young Montgomery as they walked through the impeccably maintained gardens of the mansion. "You're allowing this farce to continue." "Control yourself, Grant," replied Richard, keeping his voice low. "Sometimes it's necessary to yield in small battles to win the war. The girl will have her chance, yes, but on our terms. Without a proper saddle, without a uniform, starting last, do you really think she has any possibility?" Richard's calculating smile partially reassured his son. "Besides," continued the patriarch, "our guests expect a spectacle. We'll give them exactly that." What Richard didn't mention was the conversation he'd had with Helen the night before, after the confrontation with Samuel. His wife, always attentive to the social aspects of their decisions, had warned about rumors that were beginning to circulate among the influential families of the region. "People are talking, Richard," she had commented while brushing her hair in front of the mirror. "They're saying we're afraid of a simple girl and her mistreated horse, that we're resorting to artifices to avoid a possible defeat." "Since when do we care what they say about us?" Richard shot back, irritated. Helen placed the brush on the dresser with studied delicacy. "Since always, dear. Power isn't sustained only with money and properties. It also depends on perception. And at this moment we're not being perceived as confident winners, but as frightened oppressors." Helen's words, though bitter, contained enough truth to influence Richard's final decision. Allowing Amber's participation, even under unfavorable conditions, was now a matter of public image. In the week preceding the race, Amber and Thunder's training intensified. John established a rigorous regime, combining exercises to strengthen the animal's muscles with specific practices to compensate for the old injury. "He'll never be able to compete in the traditional way," explained the old handler, while watching Amber circling the improvised training field. "But maybe he doesn't need to. You two have developed something that goes beyond conventional technique." Amber understood exactly what John meant. The connection between her and Thunder had deepened to such an extent that sometimes just a thought, an intention, was enough for the animal to respond. It wasn't telepathy, as some of the more superstitious employees whispered, but a rare attunement, built on mutual trust and respect. "How will I compete without a regulation saddle?" asked Amber, after a particularly exhausting training session. The concern was legitimate. Official saddles offered stability and safety essential for a high-level race. John smiled, with a gleam in his eyes indicating he had already considered the question. "Have you thought about riding without any saddle at all?" The suggestion seemed absurd at first glance. Competing bareback, as the old-timers said, was extremely risky, especially in a race with obstacles like the one at Dawn Ridge Farm. "Do you think we could do it?" questioned Amber, stroking Thunder's neck. "I've observed you training, the way you move together, how you anticipate each other." John paused, carefully choosing his words. "Perhaps what the Montgomerys see as a disadvantage is, in fact, your greatest strength. Without the weight and restrictions of a saddle, you and Thunder could show a way of running that no one on that track has ever seen." The idea was daring, almost reckless, but something in Amber's heart resonated with it. In the following days, under John's patient guidance, they practiced a different form of riding, without stirrups for support, without reins to hold, depending only on natural balance and instinctive communication between rider and horse. Falls were inevitable at the beginning. Amber collected bruises and scrapes that worried her father, but with each attempt, the synchrony improved, and what seemed impossible gradually transformed into reality. "It's like we become one," commented Amber, amazed, after a particularly successful session. John nodded, with eyes wet with emotion. "Your mother called this perfect communion. She said it was rare, but when it happened, it was like magic." On the eve of the race, an incident almost destroyed everything. A sudden storm, violent as rarely seen in that region, hit Dawn Ridge Farm. Howling winds tore off roof tiles, knocked down fences, and flooded entire fields. The stable where Thunder was hidden suffered significant damage, with part of the roof giving way under the force of the water. Amber, alerted by Peter in the middle of the night, ran there accompanied by her father. They found Thunder soaked and trembling, pressed against the wall least affected by the rain. The animal seemed disoriented, his eyes reflecting the instinctive fear that the storm awakened. "We need to get him out of here," shouted Amber, trying to make herself heard above the deafening noise of the storm. Samuel quickly assessed the situation. "Let's take him to the main stable. With this confusion, no one will question his presence there." Father and daughter worked together, guiding Thunder through mud and rain to the more solid shelter of the main stable. There they wrapped him in dry blankets and spent the rest of the night watching over his rest, concerned about the effects of the cold and stress on the already fragile animal. At dawn, when the storm finally abated, they faced another problem. Thunder's injured leg showed new signs of inflammation, probably aggravated by the effort in the slippery mud. "The race is tomorrow," murmured Amber, with despair in her voice as she examined the injury. "He can't run like this." It was Claire who brought the solution, in the form of an elderly lady who had long lived secluded on the edges of the property. Mrs. Judith, as she was known, had a reputation as a healer and knowledgeable in ancient traditions of natural treatment. "My grandmother can help," affirmed Claire with conviction. She knew your mother, Amber. They were friends in the past. The revelation surprised Amber, who had never heard of this friendship. Still, without viable alternatives, she accepted the suggestion. Samuel, initially skeptical, yielded to the urgency of the situation. Mrs. Judith arrived at the stable at dusk, carrying a basket of herbs and roots that exhaled intense odors. Her eyes, darkened by age but still penetrating, examined Thunder with scientific attention that contrasted with her appearance as a simple country lady. "Your mother told me about you," she commented to Amber, while preparing a dark paste with mysterious ingredients. "She said you had the gift but would need to discover it on your own." "What gift?" asked Amber, intrigued. The elderly woman smiled, with wisdom in her eyes. "The gift of seeing beyond appearances, of recognizing nobility hidden beneath scars and pain. Celeste had that gift, and you inherited it." While applying the preparation to Thunder's leg, Mrs. Judith shared stories about Celeste that Amber had never heard. She spoke of how her mother, before marrying Samuel, dreamed of being a veterinarian, but had her dream interrupted by lack of resources. As compensation, she dedicated herself to studying traditional healing methods, combining ancestral knowledge with rigorous scientific observation. "The notebooks you found are only part of her legacy," explained Mrs. Judith. "The true legacy is in what you're doing now, following in her footsteps without even knowing it." Under the healer's care, Thunder showed signs of improvement that very night. The inflammation visibly reduced, and the animal seemed more comfortable putting weight on the leg. "He'll be ready for tomorrow," assured Mrs. Judith before leaving. "But remember, true healing doesn't come from outside, but from within. Thunder's willpower, combined with your faith in him, will make the real miracle." On the morning of the race, Dawn Ridge Farm transformed into a stage of luxury and ostentation. Imported trailers brought purebred horses, bred specifically for competitions. Young riders in impeccable uniforms paraded their animals during warm-up, while influential families occupied the boxes specially set up for the event. Amber observed everything from a distance, feeling simultaneously intimidated and a strange inner calm. She wore simple clothes, borrowed riding pants, a white cotton shirt, and worn boots that had belonged to her mother. Her hair, braided with colorful ribbons, a gift from the young daughters of employees who secretly admired her, was her only adornment. Thunder, cleaned and brushed until his coat shone like gold under the sun, waited patiently by her side. The transformation of the animal was spectacular. Where before there had been apathy and despondency, now there was restored dignity and a contained energy that impressed even the most skeptical. "Everyone is looking at us," commented Claire, who accompanied her friend as an improvised assistant. "Let them look," replied Amber with tranquility. "We're not here to impress them, but to honor a journey." Samuel approached, visibly moved. In recent weeks, Amber's father had transformed almost as much as Thunder. His habitual submission had given way to a more upright posture, a more direct gaze, as if the act of defending his daughter's dream had awakened a dormant dignity within him. "Your mother is here today," he said, embracing Amber. "Somehow she's watching us, I'm sure." Silent tears ran down Amber's face as she returned the embrace with force. "Thank you for believing in me, Dad, for risking everything." "Some risks are necessary to truly live," he replied, repeating words that Celeste used to say. The approach of Richard Montgomery interrupted the family moment. The patriarch, elegantly dressed for the occasion, examined Amber and Thunder with an impassive expression. "I see you've decided to compete without a saddle," he commented, observing the horse prepared with only a simple halter. "Under the conditions you imposed, it's the best option," replied Amber, with a politeness that didn't hide her determination. Richard nodded slowly. "You know this track has obstacles, right? Jumps, water ditches, it's dangerous even for experienced riders with proper equipment. We're aware of the risks, sir." Something in Amber's tone of voice, or perhaps in the dignity of her posture, seemed to awaken a distant memory in Richard. For a brief moment his gaze softened. "Your grandfather would have appreciated your courage, girl," he said almost to himself. "He valued that above almost everything else." Before Amber could process the unexpected comment, Richard moved away to take his place as host and principal judge of the event. The minutes preceding the start were a blur of activity. Competitors aligned in their designated positions, with Amber and Thunder relegated to last place, as determined by the special rules. The crowd, initially distracted with social conversations, gradually turned their attention to the young girl mounted without a saddle on a horse that many recognized as the former champion, fallen from grace. "Is that the girl on Thunder?" The murmurs spread among the spectators. "The horse that was injured years ago?" "They say she healed him using black magic," commented a lady, with an air of scandal. "Don't be ridiculous, Adele," her companion shot back. "The girl is Samuel's daughter. He's worked for the Montgomerys for decades." "Then why is she competing? And without a saddle? That doesn't make sense." The speculations were interrupted by the starting signal. Horses bolted from their positions, raising dust and drawing shouts of excitement from the audience. Thunder, initially hesitant, responded to Amber's gentle command with a trot that quickly transformed into a rhythmic gallop. The 3-kilometer track serpentined through the property, alternating flat stretches with natural challenges and constructed obstacles. For the spectators, there were strategic observation points, including a large grandstand near the final stretch. Amber and Thunder, starting with a significant disadvantage, found their own rhythm. The absence of a saddle, initially seen as a limitation, revealed itself as an unexpected advantage. It allowed Amber to feel every movement of the animal, anticipating his needs and communicating through the slightest adjustment of weight or pressure. Gradually, they began to overtake competitors, first the less experienced ones, then even recognized riders. With each obstacle overcome, the confidence of both increased. Thunder, driven by muscle memories of his past glories and by the unique connection with Amber, seemed to rejuvenate with each meter covered. A murmur of astonishment ran through the audience when, at the halfway point of the course, Amber and Thunder had already left more than half the competitors behind. Their way of running, she almost lying on the animal's neck in speed stretches, embracing him during jumps, created a powerful image of harmony and mutual trust. In the last 1,000 meters, only 3 competitors remained ahead. Grant Montgomery, riding Hurricane, the farm's current champion, Michael Albritton, son of the Montgomerys' greatest rival, on Storm, and Fiona Cavanaugh, an award-winning horsewoman in national competitions, riding North Star. The final stretch included the water ditch, the most feared obstacle on the track, followed by a 400-meter straight to the finish line. Amber and Thunder were rapidly approaching the leading trio, causing visible discomfort to Grant, who looked back with increasing frequency. Upon reaching the water ditch, Fiona and Michael jumped with technical perfection, maintaining their positions. Grant, visibly nervous with Amber's approach, forced Hurricane into a premature jump. The animal, confused by the mistaken command, landed on the edge of the ditch, momentarily losing balance before recovering and moving forward. Amber and Thunder faced the obstacle with a completely different approach. Instead of the conventional jump, Amber leaned to whisper something in Thunder's ear, who responded by adjusting his gallop to a specific rhythm before jumping at an angle that no traditional trainer would recommend. The movement, however, worked perfectly, taking advantage of the animal's natural strength and compensating for his old injury. Entering the final stretch, Amber and Thunder had reached 3rd position, right behind Grant. The crowd, which had initially observed with condescending curiosity, was now on its feet, divided between incredulity and growing enthusiasm for the unlikely challenger. "It's not possible," exclaimed someone in the stands. "The stable girl is going to overtake them." In the last 200 meters, Amber leaned even more over Thunder's neck, whispering words of encouragement that only he could hear. The horse, as if understanding the importance of the moment, found within himself a final reserve of energy. His hooves barely seemed to touch the ground as he overtook Grant, then Michael, rapidly approaching Fiona. The professional horsewoman, perceiving the unexpected threat, used her whip to extract maximum speed from North Star. The gesture, although common in competitions, contrasted drastically with the silent communication between Amber and Thunder. Side by side in the final stretch, the 2 horsewomen couldn't be more different. Fiona with her impeccable uniform and state-of-the-art equipment, Amber with simple clothes and no equipment beyond her connection with the animal. North Star, young and vigorous. Thunder, veteran and marked by life, but with the heart of a true champion. The crowd held its breath as the 2 horses crossed the finish line practically together. For a moment, no one could say who had won. The judges consulted the images captured by strategically positioned cameras before announcing the official result. "By a head," declared the announcer with evident excitement in his voice. Thunder and Amber Parker win the 50th annual race of Dawn Ridge Farm. The silence that followed the announcement lasted only a few seconds before being broken by an explosion of applause and shouts. The farm workers, who had watched discreetly, now didn't hide their joy. Claire jumped and shouted, embraced with Peter. John cried openly, his trembling hands raised in silent thanks. Samuel remained motionless, as if fearing that any movement might wake him from a dream. Amber dismounted smoothly, embracing Thunder's neck with tears of joy running down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "We did it together." The impact of the victory was revealed in the faces around. Grant Montgomery dismounted furiously, throwing his gloves on the ground. Helen observed the scene with lips compressed into a thin line of disapproval. And Richard Montgomery had an expression impossible to decipher, a complex mixture of emotions that he himself seemed unable to name. When Richard came down from the stands and approached Amber, the public waited, tense for his reaction. The patriarch of the Montgomery family stopped before the young girl and, to everyone's astonishment, including his own, removed his hat in a gesture of respect rarely demonstrated. "I underestimated you," he admitted with a choked voice. "I underestimated this horse. Perhaps we have all underestimated many things over the years." Amber, still embracing Thunder, couldn't find words to respond. It was Samuel who approached, extending his hand to his employer of decades. "It's never too late to recognize mistakes, Mr. Richard," he said with dignity. Richard accepted the handshake, a simple gesture that symbolized a profound change. Turning to the silent crowd, he made an impulsive decision that surprised even himself. "In honor of this extraordinary demonstration of courage and determination," he announced, with a voice that carried the authority of generations, "Dawn Ridge Farm will inaugurate a project for young people of the region. We will use the old facilities in the East Sector to create a center for therapeutic riding and training, open to all, regardless of origin or social condition." Richard's words provoked a new wave of applause. Helen, initially shocked, soon understood the social brilliance of the maneuver, transforming a potential humiliation into an act of public generosity that would further elevate the family's status. Grant, on the other hand, walked away, unable to accept the change in the course of events. In the months that followed, Richard's promise materialized in ways that no one could have predicted. The old stables were renovated and transformed into a recovery center for abandoned or injured horses. Children from the village and surroundings, especially those with special needs, were regularly brought for therapeutic sessions with the animals. Amber, now officially responsible for the program, found her true vocation in work that combined love for horses with the desire to help people. Samuel became an instructor, sharing knowledge accumulated in decades of work with horses. John, reintegrated into the team with honors, dedicated himself to training young handlers in traditional methods of animal care. As for Thunder, his story of redemption became legendary in the region. Even without participating in other competitions, he assumed an equally important role. He helped shy or traumatized children find confidence and self-improvement. His infinite patience and special sensitivity made him the favorite among the center's horses. On an autumn afternoon, almost a year after the historic race, Amber observed a therapeutic session from the top of the hill that dominated the center. Thunder walked calmly, carrying a girl of approximately 8 years, who smiled with pure joy. Beside her, Claire supervised the activity, now formally trained as a therapy assistant. "He found his true purpose," commented Samuel, approaching silently. "Just like you." Amber smiled, intertwining her arm with her father's. "Mom always said that we all have a purpose, even when we can't see it." "And she was right, as always," agreed Samuel, with longing and pride mixed in his voice. Across the field, they saw Richard Montgomery talking with a group of important visitors, probably potential donors for the project. The patriarch had subtly changed in recent months. He was still authoritarian and sometimes difficult, but something in him had softened, as if the race had awakened memories of values that had been important to earlier generations of his family. "Some victories go far beyond the finish line," reflected Amber, observing the panorama of transformation before her. "They change entire stories." The gentle breeze stirred Amber's hair, bringing the aroma of wet earth and fresh grass. In the distance, Thunder's joyful neigh seemed to agree with her words. a sonorous reminder that true nobility isn't measured by titles or possessions, but by the ability to recognize value where others see only limitations. Samuel embraced his daughter by the shoulders, with teary eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with tones of gold and crimson that resembled thunder's coat in full gallop. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered, "of all of us." Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Amber and Thunder has deeply touched your hearts. If this narrative of overcoming and hope has touched your soul, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on this video. Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexity of life and the beauty of human relationships. Share in the comments which moment of this story moved you the most and which character touched your heart. We're eager to read your impressions.